The band in Newport is the best story I've ever written. I've been writing about Arkansas history for almost 30 years. This story just screams off the page. There's history, there's fun, there's rock and roll. You can't sit still when you listen to the music, and hopefully that story comes through on the page. When I met Sonny and I started listening to the music, I knew of his life, and I said, there's a story to be told here. And then as I dug a little deeper, I found out that his life and Newport are really one story together, because he is a product of Newport. He's a product of the Delta. And what happened in the Delta and what happened in his hometown creates a character like this, creates an American story like this. The musicians that came out of Northeast Arkansas, and that's Sonny and Johnny Cash and Billy Lee Riley, you could even go as far down as Phillips County and Conway Twitty. These are the originators of this American genre we call rock and roll. That has changed the history of music. It influenced the British invasion, it's influenced people ever since. There was a big revival of rockabilly following the death of Elvis. So these guys are patriarchs. They are the ones that first put it on wax, on vinyl, on acetate. They are the ones to whom we owe an immense debt of gratitude. A lot of great musicians came out of this part of the country, Sonny leading the list with Johnny Cash and Billy Lee Riley and Conway Twitty and others. And you ask these guys, how did it all happen? How is it there was such a concentration of music in this one corner of the country? And they'll joke and say, well, it must be something in the water. It has to be in the water. And the truth is, it is something in the water. It's not the water of the Mississippi, it's not the water of the Arkansas, it's the water of the White River that comes out of the hills of the Ozarks, passes through Batesville, and hits the Delta at Newport. And Sonny and some of these other guys have drunk deeply of that water. So Newport had this tremendous series of windfall wealth: timber, cotton, pearls, and then buttons. But the biggest one of all was World War II, because an air base was created in Newport. Thanks to our Congressman Wilbur Mills, who became very powerful in Washington, 7 air bases were created in Arkansas, probably because of the flat land. It was good for flying. One of those air base training sites was at Newport. And the Newport Army, this was before there was the U.S. Air Force, there was the Army Air Corps, and the Army Air Corps built a field at Newport that overnight doubled the population of the city. About a year, actually. It went from 4,000 people to about 8,000 people in the year 1940, 1941. So you got young men, money in their pockets, looking for a good time, women ready to help them have a good time. The smart money in Newport figures out, let's build some clubs where these guys can spend the money. In a little town just east of here called Memphis, Tennessee, there's also a music explosion. And black blues artists and young white rock and roll artists were coming to Sun Records in Memphis and getting their music on acetate and vinyl. And we know about Elvis, but there are lots and lots of other guys. The young rockabilly cats from Memphis could come to Newport, play in the clubs here, and make it home by 2 or 3 in the morning, which is not a late hour if you're a young man playing rock and roll. They didn't have to spend the night on the road. And so you've got Jerry Lee and Carl and Twitty and Orbison and a host of other guys coming out of Memphis, playing the clubs up and down the Newport Highway 67. Sonny, being a native son, he didn't have to come from Memphis. He was right there, and the guys in the band were right there. Kern, coming from a sleepy little town of Turcoman, were playing music at the same time all this was happening. So the clubs are flourishing, the gambling is rolling along, rock and roll is just being established, and Newport has hit its stride. It is the next windfall of wealth and festivities. And I say Newport in the 1950s, very similar to Hot Springs in the 1920s. A little smaller scale than Hot Springs. Hot Springs had the racetrack, had gambling, and had the gangsters and others coming down from Chicago and New York, and baseball players, Babe Ruth and Al Capone came to Newport, came to Hot Springs. That was the 1920s. The folks that came to Newport in the 1950s, you had all these rock and rollers, and also had professional gamblers came through. Another thing that's happening at this time, in this remarkable mixture of excitement of America in the mid-century, electricity is being brought out into the rural communities. So the Rural Electric Administration and the local electrical co-op, which is the Farmers Electric Co-op, is stringing wires out into the country to farmhouses. There's electricity in the cities, but it's just getting out into the countryside. Most of these guys grew up in homes without electricity. They had battery-powered radios, and they had a well outside. When the electricity comes to these rural communities, think of what this means. It means you can put a pump in your well, an electric pump. You now have indoor plumbing, because you can bring water into the house. And besides the plumbing, you've got light, lamps, refrigerators, record players, radios, a dramatic change of life for rural households. The Rural Electric Association hires these young bands to go out to the communities and give programs where the people can be explained to them what is electricity, what does it mean to you, what are the safety factors, what it's going to cost, how do you wire your house. And to get people to these rural programs, they would hire the local bands like the Rocky Road Ramblers, and there are photos of a skinny young Sonny Burgess. You could tell he's a product of the Depression. He's got stick figure arms and white shirt, lean young man playing his Fender Telecaster. Off in the background is a young Kern Kennedy with a full head of blonde hair, playing the piano, and others. And they give the folks Coca-Colas and maybe a Hershey bar, I don't know. And they'd learn about electricity. So that's where they got the band that we know today as the Pacers. That's where they got their start in a public mode. Tonight, you have got the opportunity to hear that music in person, live, on stage. I'm about to turn it over to the guys that will really rock the joint. And so, without further ado, I'll say thank you, and I'll turn it over to the Pacers.
This is the first one we recorded, son. In '56 for Sam Phillips, one called We Want a Boogie.